Hello, and welcome to my 7th chess analysis. Today we're going to be going over a game played between my buddy Song with the white pieces and myself with the black pieces. This game features a lot of tension and is really played in two very distinct, different halves of the game. The opening half of the game is categorized by a very unusual pawn storming on the king side open that led to a lot of tension and a lot of pieces on just probably 1/4 of the board with a lot of tension. The second half of the game was an endgame with two rooks that was a lot of tactical play to shuffle around and try to figure out when was the right time to make a trade and make a pawn push. This game was played over the board with no time limit, and without further ado, let's get into the game.
We open with e3, which is something I don't think I've ever played against before, but he goes for this very forward pawn structure on the king side. I continue to develop my knights, so does he. It looks like a perfect spot for my knight, not being able to be challenged by a pawn and also being an outpost in his territory. Here I go to kick the bishop, but he decides to trade for the knight, and his knight jumps in. Here we have a real pawn storm on the king side. He's really just throwing his pawns right at me. This is something I'm not really used to playing against. So I capture them, and he captures some of my pieces. But basically what we have here is I don't really have a good side to castle to. Both pawn structures have been weakened, and his king side is completely open, so I'm anticipating that his king and his rook are going to be coming into the game. Here he takes the pawn, I chase with the queen. I don't mind this so much because I got my queen activated and his knight just goes back. I use this opportunity to take the open file. He attacks my bishop. What I didn't realize is that I didn't need to protect this bishop. Now, there's no way that I would probably be able to see this over the board, but it's a little advanced, but the computer thinks that I would be all right after queen, and then if he does take this, move here, he can block, check the king, king has to move, take the pawn, check again, jump in with my knight forking, bishop takes knight, I take queen with check, thinks that you can block with the rook, take with the rook, and would get a position like this. But obviously I don't have the brain power to be able to see that, so I did not go for that. Instead I go to protect my bishop. He threatens checkmate on f7, so I have to prevent that. He brings his knight in, I try to chase the queen away, and then activate my bishop. At this point, the computer sees a huge advantage for me taking on e5 with my bishop, but again, the whole line is pretty complicated like the last one and goes pretty well in depth to see the advantage, so I'm not going to cover it here. But basically what I decided to do instead is attempt to trap the queen. I moved here protecting my bishop, but I also could have just, if you see, moved my pawn, and that would have also protected my bishop, and then I could still have castled because I wouldn't have moved my king in that situation. He takes my knight, but I still think that I can take his queen, and this all happened really fast at this point. He brings his knight in, and then from here it was pieces fly off the board. I think all of these moves were made in about 10 seconds, which the first 20 moves took probably a half hour. This game was really tense up until this point, and there was so much tension over the board. Like, what is he doing with his queen? I was almost sweating. I was like, oh boy, just trying to figure out a way to try to get his queen off the board and stop it from attacking me. At this point, the game completely shifts. The focus goes from one side of the board all the way to the other, and it becomes essentially a new game. We make moves to simplify the position. I start thinking about getting my king in the game, but I think I got a little too hasty because I leave myself open for that check. And when I do take this pawn, which he can't take back because the pawn is pinned to the king, he gives me a check. It forces a trade of bishops. And from here, I take the pawn. And now this is an endgame. I have a passed pawn and two rooks versus his two rooks. I like my chances here. So I'm, of course, going to look to simplify and push with my pawns. But he really did not want to trade his rooks. And this part of the game took probably another hour of us thinking about, what to do as we played. Again, my goal was to trade the rooks and simplify down and use my pawns. Here, I think he was going to take this pawn, but it gave me enough time to take it and defend my pawn. And this was, again, really tense. Like, we were really, like, it felt like a real struggle here, back and forth. Like, the computer says that I have the advantage here, and I do. I have 3 passed pawns, but I felt like I was on a razor's edge. Like, how am I going to convert this to a win? I think at one point around this stage of the game, he offered me a draw, and I was like, no, absolutely not. I think I can win this. I just got to figure out how. But basically, from here, I'm trying to trade rooks and push pawns. So every opportunity I can to try to get him to trade, I'm taking, and slowly just creeping with my pawns up the board. Again, offering trade after trade after trade, creeping my pawns forward, and eventually being able to pin his rook to the king. So we have a trade here. I move my pawns up, and now he's not in time to be able to stop me from pushing my pawn up. And the game ends here when I queen and checkmate his king. But it was a very tense game, very well played. I was under a huge amount of stress and almost sweating. And it was definitely an experience. This game was played like in the middle of the night with our friend Andy watching, and it was a very tense and a very interesting game. That took probably the longest chess game I've ever played in my life, but I think it was a pretty good one with a lot of interesting moments.
Alright, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I did making it and definitely playing the game. It was very exciting. I'd like to say thank you for watching, and hopefully you can join me again soon on another one of these chess analyses.